In 1937, a small skirmish near Beijing escalates into a full-blown war between China and Japan. None of the soldiers know it yet, but it's the spark that sets off the Second Sino-Japanese War. And with foreign powers like Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union involved in the background, the stage is also set for an even bigger struggle, World War II in Asia. It's July 7th, 1937, near the Marco Polo Bridge near Beijing. Japanese troops stationed in the city have decided to carry out a night exercise. As an unwelcome foreign force in China, they need to stay sharp. This time, the Japanese don't tell the Chinese troops facing them that they'll be on the move, and the Chinese open fire. The clash at Marco Polo Bridge, known in China as the Lugukio Bridge, set off a powder keg that had been brewing for years. Japanese troops, along with other foreign units, had been stationed in China since the Boxer Rebellion nearly 40 years before. But Japan was not just another foreign power seeking commercial advantages. Japan had seized Manchuria in 1931, Rei Province in 1932, and had made no secret of its desire for control over a carved-up China for decades. On July 7th, following the initial exchange of fire, a Japanese soldier was missing. He was soon found, but local commander Colonel Renya Mutaguchi decided to follow up with artillery fire on Chinese positions. The Japanese demanded that the Chinese withdraw, but they refused. Japanese military was determined to impose its will and sent reinforcements to the area in response to what they called the North China Incident, and later, simply the China Incident. Chinese nationalists were divided about how to respond. Chiang Kai-shek had theoretically unified China in 1928, but his nationalist party was ideologically divided, and regional military strongmen still dominated many provinces. The problem for the Chinese was that their state and their military were weaker than the enemy. Advisor Xu Yongchang was cautious. If one can stomach it, it would be best to make the utmost effort, because if a major war breaks out, regardless of whether or not a third country intervenes, at best, both sides will lose. Chiang was also worried. Earlier, he'd focused on defeating the Chinese communists before fighting the Japanese. But he and many others now saw the struggle with Japan as an immediate and an existential one. This time, unlike in 1931, if push came to shove, China would resist and seek international support. Japanese leaders also discussed what to do. Aggressive generals like General Matsui Iwan urged an all-out attack on a China that they felt was a foreign puppet that must take its rightful place under Japanese influence. The first point is to make the Chinese abandon the policy of depending on European countries and America. The second point is to make the Chinese people recognize that Japanese troops are the real friends of China and have been sacrificing themselves in the current incident to rescue 400 million Chinese. Foreign Minister Sugiyama Hajime even told Emperor Hirohito the whole thing would be over in 1 month. And moderates like General Ishiwara were overruled. The Japanese government did send negotiators off to the capital of Nanjing, but the Japanese military arrested them before they arrived, since the army and navy were not entirely within the civilian government's control. Tokyo sent a threatening message to Chiang, saying that if they attacked, his government would be the target. The Japanese certainly had the forces to back up such threats. The army had about 950,000 men, of whom 600,000 were sent to China in 1937. They also had a far superior navy and air force, more heavy weapons like tanks and artillery, and were better trained. Chinese forces, on the other hand, were a patchwork. They had about 1.8 million troops in all, but only about 300,000 of these were fully trained and directly loyal to Chiang. The rest were warlord armies and regional militias of variable quality and loyalty. There were about 50,000 communist troops under Mao Zedong, who'd agreed to fight alongside the nationalists after years of civil war. These forces were equipped with a vast array of different makes and models of weapons, the best of which were supplied by Germany and the USSR. The Germans wanted to access Chinese resources and to get both China and Japan in the anti-Comintern Pact, but Chiang was careful to keep good relations with both Berlin and Moscow. The Soviets wanted to support China against Japan to prevent Japan and Germany from threatening them at the same time. The USSR would supply 450 pilots and ground crew and equip 20 Chinese divisions in 1937 alone. Analysts estimated that, on average, a Japanese division had 3 to 12 times the combat power of a Chinese one. On July 27, the Japanese launched a full-fledged offensive in northern China, but given the vast territory and limited troop numbers, they had to follow the railway lines. They advanced quickly towards Zhengzhou, Nanjing, and through Shahar Province, quickly sweeping aside weak resistance by poorly organized Chinese communists or warlord armies. Beijing fell on July 28. Better quality Chinese nationalist troops resisted where they could, and they managed to avoid destruction. At Pingxingguan, nationalist troops held off the Japanese while communist units under Lin Biao attacked the Japanese rear, and this modest victory was the only significant action for the Chinese Red Army until 1940. Japanese General Hisaiki Teraku ignored the line on which Tokyo had ordered him to stop and pushed ahead as far as he could. Between September and December, Japanese forces managed to capture the capitals of the provinces of Zhili, Hebei, Shaanxi, Zhejiang, and Shandong. While the Japanese were on the march in the north, Chiang made a fateful decision to open up a new front around China's most important economic and international city, Shanghai. Widening the theater of operations to Shanghai and the Yangtze River Delta had several advantages for the Chinese. It would draw Japanese troops away from the north, protecting valuable resources and the supply line for Soviet weapons. It would also move the fighting to an urban battlefield more suited to defense, and draw the Japanese into a drawn-out conflict they couldn't sustain. It would also bring the war closer to the international scene, since Western powers also had garrisons there, which, in Chiang's view, increased the chances of an eventual intervention by the West. Chiang's wife Song Mei Ling pleaded for help in a radio address to the United States. If the whole Occidental world is indifferent to this and abandons its treaties, we in China, who have labored for years under the stigma of cowards, will do our best. Chiang sent some of his best German-trained troops to the city. The Japanese had also been preparing to fight around Shanghai. They already had a garrison in the town and warships in the area as well. When skirmishing broke out on August 13th, Japanese naval guns bombarded Chinese positions. By this time, both sides had reinforced, and tens of thousands of refugees poured into the perceived safety of the international quarters. The Chinese responded by trying to bomb the Japanese cruiser Izuma, but accidentally dropped their payloads in the international settlement, killing more than 1,000 foreign and local residents in what became known as Black Saturday. A reporter witnessed the carnage. Flames from a blazing car played over distorted bodies. In shapeless heaps where they'd been huddling in shelter, bodies in coolie cloth turning scarlet lay piled up in the entrances to the main doorways and arcades of the palace and cafe hotels. Hands, legs, arms lay far from smashed masses of flesh. Dead in his tracks, as he'd been directing the corner traffic, lay the corpse of a Chinese policeman with shrapnel through his head. The Chinese attacked the Japanese garrison on August 17th, but failed to defeat it, And when fresh Japanese forces arrived, they began to drive the Chinese back in fierce house-to-house fighting. As the battle raged, the war escalated. Japanese aircraft bombed Chinese cities, killing thousands of civilians in a terror campaign. And Japanese ships blockaded Chinese ports. Emperor Hirohito asked his advisors how the situation could be de-escalated. But the military recommended a solution by force, and moderate politicians were sidelined. The Chinese mobilized, and the government issued a general war directive for the National Army, a move many historians have seen as a point of no return for full-scale war. In Shanghai, the grinding of a battle dragged on through September, October, and into November. The Japanese used every means of destruction at their disposal, including poison gas, and even made an amphibious landing south of the city at Hangzhou Bay to control its approaches. The Chinese desperately defended lines based on small rivers and creeks running through the city, but their counterattacks usually failed. The Japanese felt pressure to take the city in case of international diplomatic intervention, and they launched frontal infantry assaults against dug-in Chinese positions. These were costly but ultimately effective, and the last southern districts fell in November. Many Japanese were surprised at the fierce Chinese resistance. We viewed China as a dog. Now emerges as a wolf. Chiang later admitted that he'd made mistakes at Hangzhou and not retreating earlier from Shanghai. In all, about 750,000 Chinese and 250,000 Japanese troops were involved in the fighting, making Shanghai by some measures the largest battle of the Second World War before Stalingrad. The Chinese suffered between 187,000 and 250,000 killed and wounded, including 70% of their best-trained officers, while the Japanese lost between 40,000 and 100,000 of their best troops. The battle brought some diplomatic results, as China and the USSR signed a non-aggression pact in August that paved the way for more military aid. It also helped galvanize the long-divided country. Many warlords rallied behind Chiang, and public opinion turned ever more against the Japanese, expressed in popular slogans like "China cannot be lost," and in songs like the March of the Volunteers, which later became and remains China's national anthem. The war soon became known in China as the War of Resistance. The Japanese had conquered Shanghai, but the war was developing into a slog in accordance with Chinese strategy. This day was the beginning of my new life. I am extremely pessimistic. China will have no more history. Why should I keep my diary anymore? Defeated Chinese forces streamed west, and Chiang sacked several generals that he felt lacked fighting spirit. After success in the north and a hard-fought victory in Shanghai, Japanese commanders discussed whether they should rest their exhausted troops or push on towards Nanjing. Their decision led to one of the worst atrocities of the war. The Japanese hawks prevailed, and the High Command combined the 10th and the Shanghai armies to form the Central China Field Army under the overall command of Matsui Iwane. His forces would drive on the former nationalist capital of Nanjing to surround and crush the remaining core of Chiang's army and win a decisive victory that they hoped would end the war. In November, Chiang had moved his military headquarters to Wuhan and made Chongqing into the new Chinese capital, beyond the reach of the Japanese. But Nanjing was still an important communications hub and a powerful symbol. During the previous 10 years, called the Nanjing Decade in China, his party had started to turn the city into a symbol of what China's future might hold. A modern city with stately architecture, impressive government buildings, wide streets, and pleasant parks, all in the shadow of the mausoleum of Nationalist Party found Sun Yat-sen. Chiang's German military advisor, Alexander von Falkenhausen, and Foreign Minister Hua Zhijuang told him not to fight in Nanjing. His forces were weak and disorganized after the defeat at Shanghai, and the city was surrounded on 3 sides by the Yangtze River, making it a potential trap for defending forces. But Chiang was under political pressure from influential party members and warlord allies who wanted to fight. He had to show them and the Japanese that China still had the will to resist. He also wanted to send a signal to foreign powers, since he was trying to convince the Western powers and the Soviets to intervene on China's behalf. German ambassador to Japan Oskar Trautmann even got involved to help start peace talks. But the Japanese did not want to compromise. In the end, Stalin said he'd only intervene if the Western powers did, but they did. Chiang knew this, but still urged his men on. We must defend Nanjing. In 1 month, the international situation may change dramatically. China may avoid disaster. General Matsui initially planned to bypass the city, but intelligence reports lead him to believe that Chinese forces in Nanjing are so weak it can easily be taken. So 200,000 Japanese troops attacked on December 5th. Defending Nanjing were about 75,000 Chinese troops under General Sheng Zitang, but only about 20,000 of these were well trained. Some of the rest are so badly equipped that they lack footwear, and some regional troops simply fled. The German-trained troops in Nanjing also used German Panzer Is and German-made armored cars. The panzers had already arrived, damaged in China, and they weren't suitable for Chinese terrain or climate. Still, in the urban combat of Nanjing, they engaged Japanese troops but were later abandoned. In the hard fighting that followed, the Japanese steadily advanced. The outer ring of Chinese defenses fell on December 8th, the same day that Chiang finally left the city. The Japanese take the inner defensive ring on the 10th. As the Chinese retreated, they torched whatever they could as part of their scorched earth policy, and the advancing Japanese looted and plundered what was left. Matsui offered surrender terms, but the Chinese refused. Japanese units stormed the city walls and entered Nanjing proper on December 12th. General Tang ordered an unauthorized retreat and fled the next day. The city descended into chaos. Some Chinese units disintegrated and rushed across the river, mixing with desperate civilian refugees. Many were crushed to death at the crossing. Thousands of civilians sought the safety of the safe zone set up in the international quarter by Western residents. One of them was a German and Nazi Party member, John Rabe, who hopes for support from home in Beijing. The Fuhrer won't leave me in the lurch. The U.S. military is also in the process of evacuating us, citizens and soldiers, from the city. Aboard the U.S. gunboat USS Panay are over 70 people as they make their way up the Yangtze River. Next to the Panay are also 3 Standard Oil tankers evacuating their employees from Nanjing. On the 12th, Japanese aircraft bomb and machine gun the 4 ships and their lifeboat. 2 American Navy men and 2 Western civilians, as well as several Chinese refugees, died during the attack. The Panay reportedly was clearly marked as a U.S. Navy ship. War between the U.S. and Japan was avoided after a formal apology by the Japanese government and a payment of an indemnity of over $2 million. The victorious Japanese set to looting and burning, killing and raping in what became known as the Massacre of Nanjing, or the Rape of Nanjing. Many Chinese soldiers got rid of their uniforms, as had been the practice during the warlord conflicts, and so the Japanese considered any male a potential enemy. Japanese units organized mass killings, many witnessed by foreign journalists and international residents. A Japanese soldier wrote about it in his diary. I figured that I'd never get another chance like this, so I stabbed 30 of the damnation. Climbing atop the mountain of corpses, I felt like a real devil slayer, stabbing again and again with all my might. The G groaned. There were old folks as well as kids, but we killed them lock, stock, and barrel. I also borrowed a buddy's sword and tried to decapitate some. I have never experienced anything so unusual. Japanese troops also raped the civilian population at will, mostly women, but also teenage boys. The headmistress of a girls' college in the safe zone estimated that the Japanese raped about 1,000 women a night. Resident Cheng Rifeng summed up the atrocity. More women fled to the college because Japanese soldiers were arriving in broad daylight to steal their money and to rape. In the streets, a lot of people have been bayoneted to death. Even in the safe zone, even more have been killed outside the zone. Nobody dares go outside. Estimates of the scale of Japanese crimes vary from 5,000 to 20,000 rapes, and from 100,000 to 300,000 murders. So why did the Japanese behave this way? There are multiple factors. The army had formally abandoned the normal rules of war in July 1937. Japanese soldiers were brutalized by the violent and abusive training in their army, and they were angry about the surprising resistance of the enemy. And Japanese ideology held that they were superior to the Chinese, who had no right to exist as a sovereign nation. Japanese Army Staff Officer Ryukichi Tanaka made his position clear to a Japanese journalist. To be perfectly frank, the ways you and I look at the Chinese are fundamentally different. You seem to think of them as human, but I see them as pigs. By the end of 1937, the Second Sino-Japanese War had caused massive destruction in China. And although the participants didn't know it, it heralded the start of the Second World War in Asia. Hundreds of thousands were dead. Between 80 and 100 million Chinese were refugees. And Japan now controlled much of the north and east. No foreign powers had directly intervened, although Britain and the US were edging closer to supporting the Chinese. And the Soviet Union now took over from Nazi Germany as the primary supplier of Chinese heavy weapons, since Germany prioritized its relationship with Japan. The outlines of World War II in Asia were coming together. As historian Rana Mitter has emphasized, China was the first allied power to fight the Axis. But so far at least Japan had bitten off more than it could chew. Its armies had won many battles, but the Chinese refused to surrender and were determined to resist as a nation. There weren't enough Japanese troops to fully garrison the lands they'd seized, and they had little control outside of the cities and railway lines. The conquered regions were devastated and added little to Tokyo's coffers, and Japan was spending nearly 90% of its budget on the war. That's why in January 1938, a group of Japanese commanders met in Tokyo, and their choice was an even greater escalation of the war in China and beyond. The Second Sino-Japanese War and World War II in Asia only ended in 1945, with Japan's surrender after the dropping of the atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And while the alliance between the CCP and the KMT collapsed again, the world entered into the Cold War and a nuclear arms race. Stalin in particular accelerated the Soviet nuclear program to achieve nuclear-powered communism, and also to develop nuclear weapons. If you want to learn more about this topic, in our new series Red Atoms, we explore the origins of the first Soviet atom bomb, all the way to the Chernobyl disaster and beyond. And where can you watch Red Atoms? On Nebula, a streaming service we're building together with other creators. Nebula is a platform where we don't have to worry about the algorithm or advertiser guidelines, and where the viewers support us directly. This allows us to produce series like Red Atoms, or our World War II series 16 Days in Berlin and Rhineland 45. And it's not just us. You can watch other creators' Nebula originals there too. For a look at modern China, check out Polymatter's China Actually series. If you sign up at nebula.tv/realtimehistory, you get 40% off an annual subscription and support our channel at the same time. For just $30, you can watch Nebula originals, all our content ad-free and earlier than on YouTube, other Nebula creators, Nebula classes, and much more. That's Nebula TV/realtimehistory for 40% off and supporting us here at Real Time History directly. I hope you liked this video about the dramatic first year of the Second Sino-Japanese War and World War II in Asia. It's part of a series, by the way, so stay tuned for more. The next episode will take us all the way to Pearl Harbor. As usual, you can find all our sources in the video description below. If you're watching this video on Nebula or Patreon, thank you so much for your support. We couldn't do it without you. I'm Jesse Alexander, and this is a production of Real Time History, the only history channel that knows that if you underestimate your neighbor's resolve and invade them, you're going to have a bad time. Funyo? That's Russian for, do you understand?